Okay, I think we can start. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Max Wolf, and I'm the Public Policy Manager at the Charles River Chamber. And we're happy to bring to you a conversation with some of the candidates for the Needham Select and Planning Boards. Today, you'll hear from Heidi Frail, the current Vice Chair of the Select Board. Her opponent, Vikram Kaul, did not respond to multiple requests to participate. You also hear from Eric Greenberg, a candidate for the town's Planning Board. His opponent, Kenneth Buckley, did not respond by a couple of deadlines to participate. A reminder that all these candidates will be on the ballot for the April 8th townwide election. As for the parameters, we will start with a 20-minute conversation with Eric, and our president, Greg Reedman, will facilitate a 20-minute conversation with Heidi Frail. And then you can stick around at the end where we will field questions from the audience to either candidate. There will be no opening statement, and we will not be using a timer, but I do ask that the candidates be respectful of the time, keep their answers concise, and focus on the questions asked. I also reserve the right to interrupt and might do so in the interest of time. Finally, I did let the candidates know one last question of today's conversation, which will be if you could time travel to any one day in world history, just to observe, but not to change anything, which day would you choose? So we're going to start with Eric Greenberg. Yes. And I'll get a little timer going, but thanks for joining us, Eric. Appreciate it.
Max, thanks for having me here. Thanks for the work that the chamber does for the community.
Yeah, appreciate it. And so can you tell us a little bit about yourself? What do you do now and why you want to get into public service?
Sure. My day job, I'm a commercial real estate attorney. I've been practicing law for almost 20 years. I moved to Needham with my wife, Joanna, in 2016. And when we were looking for places to live, Needham was the perfect choice for us because my wife was born in Needham and her parents were born and raised in Needham. So we always had that connection. And ever since we moved to Needham, we knew people, including the former town council, who wanted to get me involved. And at the time, I was like many young families. I was focusing on schools, sports, and sort of taking a break at that. Just wanted to sort of get my feel of Needham. And 8 or 9 years later, with what's happening on the national scene and what's happening locally, there's a lot of big challenges and opportunities that Needham's going to face, certainly from a planning and development standpoint. And with the one attorney member of the planning board stepping down, I think it's really important that the next planning board member be able to step in and really jump and get into those challenges that I just mentioned, really get up and running quickly. And my legal and my real estate background will help me do that. And I've also just been talking to people after the referendum, talking to people no matter how they voted. And it's clear that people want a consensus builder, someone that's willing to work with people on the issues that are facing Needham, whether it's on bringing small businesses and local businesses into our retail and commercial centers or working on housing. There are a lot of similarities to what people want. And in my early conversations, I'm confident that we can do that. And so I'm really excited about being in this race and really listening to people and see what we can do together.
Thank you. And to that end, what do you think the current planning board is doing right now and doing wrong right now?
So that is a great question. And it's been a conversation that has come up a lot. I think the planning board, what they're doing right is they're really doing a good job of being the adjudicator role of the planning board. They're taking in proposed projects, they're reviewing them, and sort of handling that basic process. Where I'm hearing that we're an area that we can work on is sort of taking back the planning component of the planning board, really working with our communities to plan and get engagement from all stakeholders of what we can do around town to really improve the quality of life, to improve our neighborhoods, to improve our business community. And the planning board does have in the zoning bylaws that very duty and obligation. And I think the vision and planning aspect of the planning board, because of a lot of things that we've gone through in the last several years, COVID, it's understandable that we sort of had to stray away from that as we're just dealing with the minutia of what the planning board typically does. But I'd really like to see working with different neighborhoods, different communities, different groups and stakeholders to really plan for Needham's future and really do it together.
Thank you. And so in a Needham Observer article, you said you wanted Needham to rethink how it approaches public engagement, and you talked a little bit about that too, building consensus. You called yourself a consensus builder. So how do you balance building a consensus with our community's pressing needs, housing needs especially, which some people argue cannot wait for a consensus?
Yeah, look, housing, I looked at the today, this morning, so the average single family home price in Needham, there are 24 houses on the market right now, 24. That's such low inventory. The average price of those houses, 2.8 million. That is a problem. That is not sustainable. And that is something that does need to be addressed now. We are not allowing young families to get into Needham. And older families, empty nesters, people who want to downsize, they have nowhere to go. So there is an immediate problem that we need to address now. Now, in terms of consensus building, again, after the referendum, I spoke to people on the no side, I spoke to people on the yes side. There are areas where we can certainly work together. And one area, for example, is 55 plus housing. There seems to be broad consensus. And so, with the MBTA Communities Act, the hope is that town meeting pushes forward with the base plan. I think they're going to do that. And I think that's sort of the first step. And then after that, with really intense community engagement early and often, as I say, we can look at other opportunities. There's going to be other proposals that are going to come in front of the planning board that are outside of the base plan. And we ought to be looking at sort of other areas that are away from neighborhoods that aren't going to have big
And
impacts.
excuse me, and
Sure.
just getting back to the question a little bit.
Mhm.
If a project goes before you and there isn't a consensus, as a consensus builder, does that mean you can't support it? And how does your kind of self-identification as building consensus, there's going to be some tough projects that aren't consensus that you might think are worthy or not. And how do you balance those two competing priorities?
So the planning board with the select board and town meeting are going to have to find that balancing point. We're going to have to work early in the process, whether it's from the conceptual stage of a project getting in there, to make sure that a developer who's bringing a project, engages the community at the very onset. One of the complaints that I've been hearing from people that I've spoken to is that community input sometimes feels like comes when there's already a decision that's baked in. And so I think having that buy-in from a community earlier on, even if it's not the exact outcome that the community gets at the end of the process, if we build that trust and that relationship early on and keep that and maintain that throughout the process, that will be very helpful. And at the end of the day, there's going to be some compromise that's going to be necessary. And I think it's going to be important to have people on the planning board and other boards in this government, in the town, that are able to have those relationships with people, with the stakeholders, with the leaders in town, to really craft those compromises. There are going to be some tough issues that are going to be ahead of us in Needham. There's going to be some controversial products. There's going to be products that are very sensitive. And it's going to be important for experts and people that are level-headed and the ability to bring people to the table to have those difficult conversations. And yes, there are going to be projects that not everyone agrees on, and there could be some close votes. But I think we have a fair process, one that engages the community very early and continues to do so. I think that's going to go a long way and really build sort of trust within the community.
Yeah, thank you. And to that end, was the public process that brought about the two MBTA compliance plans that that town meeting voted on thorough enough for your liking?
So I'm going to speak from it as an outsider, because I've heard sort of two versions of it. For people who were involved in town meeting, the process seemed that there was a lot of information out there, and there were a lot of meetings and sort of a lot of opportunities to engage. I'm not a member of town meeting. I was not part of any of the campaigns for the referendum or for the different neighborhood plan or the base plan. I'm speaking as someone who was sort of outside that process. Sort of in that group, I think there was some lack of engagement. And it's not a criticism of the select board, of the planning board, of town meeting. It's just always going to be difficult to get the certain groups of people who are hard to get. And I really do think for the people, again, I spoke to a lot of young families who are right now very interested in the school committee race, that still don't know what happened with the referendum and with the base plan and the neighborhood plan. So we really ought to sort of figure out, how do we get that group involved? And there's different issues that we may need to focus to get certain groups of people involved. So I think, again, just to summarize it, there was part of town who were very engaged. I think there was a really strong process in place. But there is the other half of town maybe aren't reading everything online. They're not reading Facebook. They're not reading the town website. We should redouble our efforts to get them involved as well.
And when you say redouble your efforts, some of these people are hard to reach. Do you think what ideas do you have to engage these people that are, the unengaged voters and broad broad consensus to the town? Because there were a lot of public meetings,
There are
but it's
there
hard
are
to
a
get
lot.
people to go. So do you have any solutions in your
Yeah,
mind?
I mean, I'm not suggesting that we fly like an airplane with a banner, advertising, a public meeting, but the way people seek, consume, and retain information has changed so much in the last 5 years. And whether it's social media, whether it's Twitter or X or Instagram, I joke that my 9-year-old daughter and my 70-year-old mother-in-law find information the same way on Instagram. And again, we really need to sort of expand the mediums that we're reaching out to people. Whether it's PTC should take a more of a role to hit the school age population. Again, I've been sort of talking, I was just at the Sunita Williams PTC dinner the other night. And again, this was just not a topic that was on their radar. So to me, that says, well, maybe, there should be some kind of connection with PTC to talk about these issues because housing is affecting all these young families. Another idea would be, and again, it's always going to be a cost issue. So I'd love to sort of collaborate with the finance committee, but sort of looking at our website to make it sort of more user friendly. One thing I in my work, having these online public dashboards that have a project and you see it from what we call cradle to grave, where at the very beginning, if it's a big proposal or a big topic, like a zoning issue, it's a live tracker of every single step rather than getting an email here or an email there. Max.
Thank you. Thank you. We just need to move on a little bit for time.
Sure.
So now a little bit to your opinions on housing. The town is moving forward with the base compliance plan. I mean, that is what is happening. Will this be enough to address Needham's housing needs?
The base plan itself probably will not be enough to address the housing needs. However, there are other opportunities outside of the base plan. There's going to be projects that are going to be coming up in front of the planning board very soon, including in the center and in the Heights. And there's going to be opportunity to have housing component there with community engagement, obviously. And then we ought to, as a planning board, look at other areas of town. One area that I'm looking at is sort of the Charles Street area, right across the highway. On the Newton side, there's a lot of activity, and that seems to be on our side, like along the Charles River. Is that an area that we can sort of look at the zoning and be creative? It won't have a substantial impact on a neighborhood because it's mostly a commercial retail area, where now that we're sort of outside the requirements and limitations of the MBTA Communities Act, we can be a little bit more hyper-focused on housing. We can be hyper-focused on 55 plus. We can be hyper-focused on workforce housing, affordable housing. We can really look at those housing opportunities. Again, coming out of the referendum, I've spoken to a lot of people, whether they voted yes or no, who do want to take a look at those opportunities. And we can also look at the center of town, like along Chestnut, and see if there's other zoning opportunities that may provide more opportunity for housing.
Okay. And so the base plan we have right now, and you're saying we should look for other solutions. But in terms of other solutions for upzoning, which that like the bigger plan, the neighborhood compliance plan, was not passed, but there's conversation that we need to eventually reevaluate the effects of the base plan. How long do you think we need to reevaluate the effects of the base plan to see if we need to move forward with more broad strategies?
I'm going to use sort of a Supreme Court justice quote. Like, I think we'll know it when we see it. And the reason why I say that, it was a Justin Harlan quote. It's going to be hard to tell. When the base plan gets passed, I think very quickly we'll see how many new projects come out of it. Take a look at Lexington. Lexington went far, far, far above what Needham was planning to do on the neighborhood plan. They also have more space. A lot of their lots are just more buildable. And I always tell people it's always tricky and dangerous to compare one town to another. But Lexington, I think, upzoned to close to 19,000 units of capacity. In about a year, they have about 1,000 units of projects underway. And I think of that 1,000, a bulk of that comes from 2 projects. What we're probably going to see in Lexington is the following year, you maybe get half of that sort of 1,000 unit. And so we're going to have to sort of take that analysis and see what happens in Needham. Let's see what happens 1 year. How many units are we going to see under construction in Needham? Is it going to be, again, since we're going to go to the base plan, which upzones the capacity to about 1,800, there's already 775 units there, so it's roughly like 1,100. I'm not so great at math. Let's see, are we going to get 100 new units, 50 units? I think that's going to be the sort of the big factor in the first year to see how much construction is underway for new units under the base plan.
Okay, thank you. I think we're going to move on from housing. This summer, the town will pilot a redesign of Great Plain Ave in Needham Center. This plan involves reducing the number of lanes. Do you like the direction of this project?
I like the direction of the project in that we're trying to revitalize the center. I'm still reviewing the different aspects of it. I think having the center be more walkable, more inviting, to bring in families, to bring in people, to have people walk from business to business is important. The detail is going to be the balance of how we're going to do it. Because at the same time, if we remove a lane, that removes parking. And that could that's one of the big criticisms from local businesses, that people don't come to the center necessarily because of parking. So with anything that we do, it's going to be really, really important at these public meetings that members of the public go and voice their concerns or their recommendations. I went to one of the recent Envision meetings, and there weren't many people in the room. And I think we need to get more people in the room to sort of give their opinion on what should there be there. Look, as a dad of a 9-year-old who's now venturing on her own, my daughter wants to go into Needham Center by herself to get an ice cream at Abbott's or get a pizza slice at Needham House of Pizza. So I certainly wanted to do something that's going to make her safer for her to get in there. And so I'll always support that, but we need to do it in a way that really brings in the community input and makes sense for Needham.
Thank you. And it sounds like you want to prioritize walkability. So in many decisions, there'll be an opportunity to prioritize pedestrians or cars. When you look at all of Needham's commercial centers right now, which group do you think needs more prioritization, cars or pedestrians?
I think pedestrians slightly more than cars. Again, it shouldn't be a zero-sum game necessarily, but you talk to the local businesses here in Needham, it's so much better if people are walking, not just going to destination shopping, but walking down. They get a bagel at Bagel's Best, and then they go to Pura Vida to buy a little birthday present, and then they go down to a salon to get a haircut. We want sort of people to stay in the center to use the businesses, which will encourage more business to come into Needham. It will encourage more small local amenities for the people of Needham. So having more of like that vibrant, walkable center will go a long way to attracting. I think will have a positive effect overall for the neighborhood.
And to that end, do you have any ideas to increase foot traffic for Needham restaurants and retailers who really say that's one of their biggest issues?
Yeah, so a couple things. If there's a way that we can build more housing along Chestnut through the base plan. I was at a planning board meeting last week where a big discussion is how do we make Chestnut more walkable? And I think if we have more, smaller, modest development of housing along Chestnut, you create people to do the people walking. So that is one thing. And also, a planning board sort of work on the planning function and work with the select board collaboratively to sort of come up with some policies or procedures and incentives with the local landlord community to try to get more small local businesses into the center to provide an amenity for a town. There's not going to be any magic bullet. We really do have to work together on this, but we can do it.
And to that end, you're talking about maximizing housing along Chestnut Street. If there are plans or new proposals into that, they will be under by right through the amputee communities zoning.
That is
possibly
correct.
By right. Do you view that how do you view that process? Do you think it is incumbent upon you to get as many concessions allowed under by right, or do you really think that we should try to build housing as fast as we can? It's two competing priorities there. What do you look for?
Well, with the by right, we're certainly going to be more limited to what we can push back on. That being said, as a real estate practitioner, what a lot a lot of the towns that are dealing with construction under the MBTA Communities Act, sort of the site plan review process has almost become the new special permit process. So there are ways that towns have sort of merged that and made a new sort of review process. I mean, that's a little bit of a separate issue, but when it comes down to the development that's going to happen.
I think it is a separate issue, but I think that's what I'm asking. Do you want site plan review to be a pseudo special permit, or do you respect kind of the very limited ability of site plan review?
So I think the site plan review becoming the special permit, if there's some really large project with a lot of units, that's probably where that happens. But if we're talking about a 4-unit building, that's not going to have a huge impact on the neighborhood, a huge impact on walkability, a huge impact on abutters. The MBTA Community Act was built for that purpose. And again, it's still going to be important from a master planning standpoint to make sure that the community is involved and that the community has a say and will do, sort of in the abutter process. But there's going to be some development through the MBTA Communities Act. It's probably going to be more modest, but that will certainly help improve and revitalize sort of the Chestnut corridor that leads to the center and get more foot traffic there.
Okay, I think we're out of time for now, but stay on and there'll be another chance for a couple more questions at the end with both you and Heidi. So I'm going to hand it over now to our president, Greg Reedman, and he will be facilitating the next conversation with Heidi Frail.
Thanks, Max.
Oh, terrific. And Eric, before you go, I have to say that I've been doing these things for many years, and you win the prize for name dropping more businesses into a conversation than anyone else. So good for you for getting as many Needham businesses into conversations you could. But thank you very much, Eric. And Heidi, what fun this is. We've known each other for years, but haven't had an opportunity to have this kind of conversation, certainly not a conversation with other folks. So we appreciate that opportunity. I will want to know how you feel about airplane banners to publicize events or not. We can talk about that in a minute.
That's a new idea. That's great. This is why we need more people running for all these boards. Fantastic.
Well, yeah, and that's what I wanted to ask you about or start with. So I actually, and I wanted to just remind anyone who might be joining late that we did invite your opponent, Vikram Kaul. We tried to reach him several times and to invite him to participate, and he did not respond to our requests. So I would like to have done this as a debate, but it's not. There was a profile of you today in the Observer where I learned something interesting, which was that you joined or got into politics after or inspired by what happened in the 2016 presidential election, which is a time when many people were inspired to get into the politics, including particularly many women. Did you have a pink pussy hat, by the way?
No.
You did not. Okay. So you joined in that same wave of many other people, and particularly women who did that. That's not something we have seen nationally this year at a time when people are also really kind of challenged by that. But it is something we saw in Needham, where there's a record number of candidates running for, virtually every office. And sometimes it's just uncontested races, including for town meeting. I'm wondering what you think that says about Needham in this moment and how we harness that and really get your impressions of what that means.
Sure. Well, thanks, Greg, and thanks to the Chamber for having me. Basically, I think all engagement is good engagement. I acknowledge that I think a lot of people are running in this cycle because of the referendum. I think it caught people's attention and it captured their imagination in some cases. And I think that what that says to me is that more communication is required, and all input is good input. So basically, whether it's the issue of the referendum or any issue, I think having folks participate in the process, throw their hat in the ring, and get involved is a great thing. So I'm inclined to just say, hooray, and call that a win.
And how do we build on that to make sure that this is not a one-year phenomenon, but it's going forward? We're getting more people engaged in civic activities.
Yeah, well, I think it's challenging. I mean, certainly from my experience recently, the town really works very hard on communicating, but to Eric's earlier point, there are so many channels for communication these days that it really is hard to capture everything in one place. And I think, unfortunately, that's why people do end up using Instagram and Facebook to sort of channel all of their different channels that they're using for communication. So I think meeting people where they are, advertising on all of those places, the events that are happening in town is something that we've been trying to do. And certainly I think one really good example of that is the Needham Police Facebook account, which has been very active and advertising events, but also local occurrences that people need to be aware of, whether that's a downed tree or whatever. So I think, we just need to keep working on it. I think I'm not sure that I'm ready to fly a banner over town, but I do think that there are already things that we've identified that have been working and that are new ideas to enhance the communication strategies that we're already employing. This is a challenge nationally. It's not a surprise to me that it's a challenge in Needham, and it's one that we're going to, hopefully all these new candidates will come in with new ideas and we'll take advantage of them, add them to the repertoire.
Great, thanks. So everyone knows you led the battle over the Needham housing plan, and voters overwhelmingly rejected it. I'm not going to ask you why you supported it. Everyone knows that. We've been through this many times, and the chamber supported it enthusiastically too. But what message do you think the results told you? What does it say about what did you get from that message?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm going to go back again to communication. The town, the Housing Plan Working Group, and the Housing Committee really did put a lot of thought into communicating not only the plan at the end, but the process at the beginning. In fact, we sent a postcard before even we held our first meeting to every home in Needham to let them know that this was going to happen. And then 3 months later, another postcard. I think that Eric's point about people being busy is a good one. Before I got motivated to get into these things, I was a mom working with 2 young kids, and I missed a lot of stuff. So I sympathize. It's very hard to keep your eye on every ball in town, and particularly now that we don't have a physical newspaper that comes to your house. But we still have to carry on doing projects.
That seems to suggest you think that it's only the people who weren't knowledgeable of it, as opposed to the fact that they really didn't like what the plan was going to do.
No, it just means that I would have liked to have had more input from the get-go.
Right.
We thought that we were receiving a lot of input, and it was,
right.
And at the time, there were certainly people who were unhappy with the plan, but there were a lot of people who were very happy. And that's actually the 2 plans that we ended up proposing came out of that feedback.
Right.
If we had gotten more feedback, and particularly more negative feedback towards a larger plan, that might have changed the plan that we eventually brought to town meeting. But what we heard at the time is what engendered those plans. So I guess what I'm saying is not that people didn't understand. It's that we didn't receive the input that would have resulted in that end.
Okay,
result.
but meanwhile, we still have a housing problem, right? We
Yes.
still don't have a place for seniors to downsize. We don't have a place for adult children to stay in the community where they grew up. We don't have a plan. We don't have the vibrancy and foot traffic in our town center, which I'm going to get to in a second. So what do we do?
Well, the base plan is going to town meeting in May, and I am very hopeful that will pass without.
But I think we all know that's not going to yield a lot.
It is unlikely to yield. It certainly won't yield what we were hoping for with the neighborhood plan.
Right.
That's true. But there are other housing projects happening in Needham. The Needham Housing Authority has a wonderful renovation and enlargement project that we're very supportive of from the town. There's also the Charles River Center that is proposing not only a housing solution for their community, but also for Needham residents who are who fit the requirements. So I think, we're going to be looking at what can be done under the base plan, and any new housing projects through the planning board will have to, again, like rev up for making sure that we have real community input so that the result mirrors what the community is looking for.
Okay, so let me ask you about our Needham Heights small businesses and our Needham Center small businesses. And there was a number that just knocked me over when I saw it last week. The Boston Business Journal reported the numbers for the revenue of restaurants from 2019, the end of 2019, so just before the pandemic, Q4 2019, and then compared them with Q4 of last year. So 5-year difference before the pandemic, okay? In general, Needham revenue was up 7%, okay? Newton's revenue was up 23%. Oh, no, I'm sorry, Newton's revenue was up 18%. Wellesley's revenue was up 23%. Watertown's revenue was up 55%. Watertown is different because they added a lot of housing over the last couple of years. They also had a lot of businesses and a lot of new restaurants. But let's go back. So Needham restaurant revenue is up 7%. People might say, okay, well, that's not too bad, except when you consider that the cost of the consumer price index went up 23%. So Needham restaurants are in really vulnerable shape, even more than our peers, right? How do we, I wonder if you have any ideas about what that means, what that tells us about the situation, but more importantly, how do we help them? And you can know, I think you know that we all know that if restaurant revenue is that bad, the retail revenue has got to be just as lacking. We just don't have the same numbers for that to measure.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah.
I think that anything that we can do to provide foot traffic to these businesses is certainly important, and that's commercial and residential. So the more we can attract businesses, the more we can attract development, for example, at the Avery Square building, the building across from Trader Joe's, that will bring foot traffic. I think that project in particular will be such a boon to Avery Square, the restaurant there, but also all of the businesses that are there. And then attracting new or enlarged commercial ventures in Needham will also be important. The CEA, the Council of Economic Advisors is one of the committees in town that I sit on, and we are looking to do kind of a listening tour and to work to have smaller groups from that committee that work directly with some of these retailers in the different business areas in Needham to see what they need and to see how the town can be more supportive.
Right. Okay. So bringing more people in makes a lot of sense. But as Jay Spencer reminded you all at the board meeting last week, there's also the continual regulation and just making it so much harder for businesses to operate, including, banning plastic products, but any of the other things that are just making it harder. And we all know that many businesses were really stunned by their increased property tax bill this past year. How do we help businesses how does the select board, how does the town help businesses on the expense side of operating and being in Needham?
Right. Well, so the Council of Economic Advisors right now is reviewing the process that businesses need to take to open and sustain a business in Needham, and to try to make that easier and less expensive. So that's one way, getting them started. Keeping them in business, I think one of the things that I'd like to see is more community events held in the center of town or in Avery Square, for example, that would draw people to these businesses, and not only draw people to the businesses, but establish a community network, right? So people come together, they're meeting their neighbors, we're building community, and we're building community with our businesses, so that people can understand that it's a relationship of interdependence.
Right. Okay. So now let's talk about big businesses. So Needham has been fortunate to attract several big brand or nationally known companies here. TripAdvisor is here, and Shark Ninja, and Big Belly Solar, and a number of others. NBC 10 and TripAdvisor came here on a tax relief program, but I think at the end of the day, it's paid off handsomely for the town. It's really helped the tax revenue and created kind of a special place and opportunity for people to work and good salaries. So how do we attract bigger employers here? How do we do that, especially knowing how difficult it is right now for the office market?
Right. Well, we're lucky to have Boston Children's coming to that same location, and they're going to be opening late in 2025. And actually, I think that's going to be a really important business for that area, because they come in with some food service, which is something that's missing in that area. And I think, all of this momentum, not only the businesses that are in the industrial park there, but also, Newton is moving along with some residential development basically right next door. And I think all of these things play nicely together. So I'm hoping that the interplay of all these new businesses and new residences will really assist.
Great. Okay, two more questions for me. First, related to the Great Plain Ave and the downtown redesign area. How do we avoid basically what happened with the whole housing scenario where you do all this engagement and there's been tons of effort to try to engage people. Then you announce or come forward with a plan and suddenly people say, wait a minute, A, nobody told me about it, and B, it's going to disrupt my own particular lifestyle.
It's a challenge. I think we just have to keep at it, keep mentioning it at every opportunity. I think we're going to have to sort of cross-pollinate so that even those town committees and offices that aren't related to that project really need to start publicizing to all of their constituencies, whether that's the schools or anyone or any other board. We're going to have to start mentioning all of these things in a more holistic way. You know, there are direct text notifications and so on that people can sign up for. I hope that people will sign up for the Needham Observer and the Needham Local to get those messages into their inbox. I will say that for some of these projects, we have employed our community groups like the Needham History Center, for example, that have newsletters and included that information in those places to get it out to groups beyond just the super engaged people who already know. So I think we'll be employing every single tactic that we can, and we'll just keep at it. So hopefully people, especially now following the referendum, are aware that they need to reach out to make use of some of these outlets as well.
Okay. Last question for me. If you are reelected, you are in line to become chair of the board, as your colleagues will decide that, but that's been the tradition. The vice chair goes on to be chair. So what's your kind of agenda? How do you want to prioritize as chair of the select board? What are the main things you want to do? And also, is there any part of that consideration? It's like, there's so much chaos on the federal level that's making people uneasy and uncomfortable. Does that fit at all into what the select board's work does? It's kind of a two-part question.
So yes, absolutely. The chaos at the federal level absolutely will impact. Well, it's going to impact the lives of everyone living here, not only because so many people are employed in research and education and medicine and technology here, but it certainly will have impacts, or at least a huge measure of uncertainty that goes into our budgeting process, which is usually a very reasonably predictable and meticulous process. And when last minute changes come up, it makes it very difficult. So a lot of attention will go towards that. I will say, we have this year the opportunity, the sad opportunity, to pick a new town manager to lead Needham into the next decade. As our longtime town manager, Kate Fitzpatrick, retires, I consider this to be one of the most important decisions that the select board can make, period. This is the CEO of our town, and this person will chart a path for Needham into the future. And so I think that's a really important transition that needs to be carefully tended. Implementing the base plan will be an important project for all of the town and town boards. And then I think, aside from the budgeting, I really do think that improving our communication and using that communication to build community is absolutely one of the most important functions that the select board can facilitate. And so making sure that people understand that we are listening, that we are wanting to build that kind of communication channel and consensus so that we can move forward with any kind of project into the future is really important.
Great. Thank you very much. Let's bring back Eric and Max. And if anyone who's watching has a question, just raise your hand and we'll be happy to let you ask your question directly. I'll just start though. So, and for a question for both Eric and Heidi, if you could add any one public service or amenity to Needham that has, without any concern for funding, if you could do it, what would it be? And Eric, you get to go first. Or,
I do.
I'm sorry, Heidi raised her hand. Okay, Heidi, you go first.
A newspaper. Now,
I
know that we already have two fantastic newspapers, but it is, and they're wonderful, but they do not go to people's homes and they do not translate in the same fashion. So I would say a newspaper, hands down.
Very good. Eric?
A world-class, or for our town, performing arts space. We do so many great things, from music to dance, and we have to go to Natick or surrounding towns because we don't have that space available for our community.
Great. Max, what do you think we should ask next?
Okay, I have one. What is another attribute of another community that you wish Needham had? We can start with Eric on this one.
I love Needham. I mean, we have such great things here that usually they want the attributes that we have. I think walkability in some of the sort of center areas. You go to some of the surrounding communities, you park in a parking lot, and you walk and you hit 3 or 4 different shops. And instead of just sort of going to one shop or another, we have terrific businesses in Needham, whether it's in the Heights, in the center, or elsewhere. But I think we can make their lives better if we improve the walkability that we see in other communities.
Yeah, I guess I would answer in a similar vein. I'm thinking of Newton Center. I'm thinking of Wellesley Center that just has such a community zone in their downtown where you can really do a lot of your errands, but also a lot of window shopping, which is great.
Great. Anyone in the audience have a question? Max, you have more questions?
Except the final question.
Oscar Mertz has a question. Go right in. Unmute yourself, Oscar. And
hi guys, nice to hear you talk and all your thoughts. Wonderful to meet you, Eric. And I would like to just ask, I know many people have talked about a vision for a shuttle that would run up and down Highland and Chestnut and connect maybe from Muzzy all the way down to the junction as a benefit for people of all ages. I know that's a challenging thing to pull off. Just how do you pay for it? So I was curious if that's anything that would be a kind of a 5-year out plan or something, or a 3 to 5 year plan. Does that feel, is it doable, or is it just a dream? Thank you.
Heidi, why don't you take sort of the general
happy.
government, and I could talk about the planning development aspect of that. So.
Sure, I'm happy to. Yeah, this is actually something, this sort of last mile transportation is something that the town has been talking about for a few years, and in fact has done a few studies on different modes, whether it would be a little shuttle bus or like a Needham only sort of Uber situation. And there's a lot of enthusiasm for it. There isn't as much money for it. And so I think the question is a balancing of priorities, but it is absolutely something that's on the town's radar, and it may be that the time has come to re-examine it.
Yeah, from a planning standpoint, I think there's nothing wrong for us to really think about how we can connect neighborhoods and communities within Needham, especially if we want to build out neighborhoods and communities across the highway, closer to the Charles River area. There's going to be a really great opportunity to do that. And one of the things that should be considered is, how do we connect these different communities so that we feel as one community? Like, cost is going to be an issue, just as much as, FinCom probably is not going to take my idea to do the airplane with the banner. There might be some issues with a shuttle, but we should, from a planning and development standpoint, look at what we can do in terms of connecting communities. It may not be a shuttle, maybe it's a bike path or a walking path that's doesn't take away any roads or parking lots or parking spaces. But these are things that we should absolutely look at.
Terrific. Any last questions before we ask our last question from?
I think we have one in the chat right here.
Like, go ahead, Max.
From Wenley. What would you do to improve or attract quality local restaurant businesses to Needham? I think we touched on it a little bit, but specifically the restaurant aspect. And to that end, what is one business that has left Needham, a restaurant that you wish could come back?
So when I lived in the Heights, and again, I love Abbott's, don't get me wrong, but when I lived in the Heights, I loved the orange leaf frozen yogurt. And you know, we got a great Mexican restaurant in its place. But I think again, I'm speaking for the young parents out there with the young children, some more family friendly, but really good food dining options is something that I think would be really good for Needham.
And I guess as far as a restaurant that's left, I would say I'm so sad to see Le Petit Four go. Needham doesn't have its own bakery, and I would really like croissants. So as far as what we can do to recruit, I think that we can, and actually that's something that I've sort of just been leaning into recently. We can try to recruit businesses. I'm thinking in particular of the newly zoned, or not new, so newly zoned brew pub. It's time to fill that spot.
Very good. Last call for anybody? All right, so this has become a tradition for chamber forums with candidates. Oh, I'm sorry, Jean has her hand up. I apologize, Jean.
I was just trying to put it in the chat, and
Yeah,
but I want to ask Eric, is when he was asked what projects might be coming up, I know one or things the planning board has to concentrate on in the coming year or so. I'd ask him his thoughts about possible rezoning of the Muzzy site, since the zoning that was adopted a few years ago has not resulted in the development we had hoped for. So that's my question. What's your thoughts are?
Thanks. So that's an excellent question, and it's also a question that's being asked right now. It's a topic that members of the community, especially in the Needham Heights area, it's on top of their minds. And then, you know, the Muzzy site's going to be a very important project for Needham. It's going to have the potential to impact it in a very positive way. However, just coming out of the referendum, I think it's very important that with the Muzzy redevelopment, the way that we do it is with community engagement from start to finish, really early on. You know, I think right now the zoning allows for about 240 residential units, and if the owner of the Muzzy parcel is going to come up and request a zoning change, it's going to require a lot of community input, and we need to make sure that it's a project that makes sense for Needham and doesn't impact in a detrimental way the neighborhood from a traffic standpoint, from a services standpoint. And again, a lot of things that we've talked about today in our conversation about getting that community engagement, so that it's not a decision that's made at the last moment, but it's going to require a lot of work with the community.
Great. Heidi, you're welcome to add your thoughts here.
Well, I'd love to see something happen there, but I will leave that to the planning board. I think that's where it lives properly.
Great. Okay. So we're going to leave it there, except for our final question, which, as I mentioned, has been something of a tradition for these candidate forums lately. And I'll give it to Max to read that, remind everyone what that is.
Thanks. Okay. If you could travel in time to any one day in world history, just to observe, but not to change anything, which day would you choose and why? Let's start with Heidi on this one.
Okay, I'm going to show a little picture, if I may, sort of inexpertly from my camera. This is a passport photo that hangs in my living room and in the living room of all of my family. This is my great-grandmother, Regina, and my grandmother, Sandy, and her sister, Estelle, and Harry. And this photo is from their trip from Warsaw. Family passport photos were a thing then, when they left Warsaw to come to Ellis Island and make their home here, which is how my whole family got started. And so I think that actually the idea of crossing the ocean with 3 small children to a place where you don't speak the language and you don't really know anyone, sometimes I think our modern life is hard. That sounds really hard. So I think what I'd love to see is the arrival of the boat and the emergence of the family into the new world, and to understand how on earth this woman made this work. there are so many strong women in my life who have helped me to realize a lot of my dreams, including being on the select board. But that woman takes the cake.
All right, so you have got me tearing up a little bit on that one, Heidi. Good luck to you, Eric. Go ahead.
All right, so mine, I'm gonna try not to tear up for mine. But Heidi's already got me going, so
Yeah.
I can't make any promises.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll cheat a little bit. I'm definitely a history buff, so I'd make a quick stop to the grassy knoll in Dallas during the JFK assassination to see what happened there. But then I would go further into the future. My father has had a lot of health issues, and about 5 years ago, he was diagnosed with vascular dementia. And even before then, I could tell something was happening. And, 10, 15 years ago, he was a best friend of mine. We would have conversations about everything, about sports, about entertainment, about politics and history. He would ask me about JFK, and his favorite book was about Oppenheimer, and seeing the movie that just came out, he would have loved that. I would love to go back to a time where it would just be the two of us, and I can watch us having one of those conversations again, because I haven't had a conversation like that in about 10 or so years. And I just really miss that. And it's just important, with families to be able to have conversations with people that you love that are meaningful. And I certainly miss that with my father. And I would travel back to a time where I can just watch that happen.
Wow. Very good, both of you. Thank you. Max, I'll let you wrap it off and thank our guests.
Well, thank you both for coming today, and appreciate the conversations we had. I'm sorry we couldn't do a formal debate, but I think it was two useful conversations, and we will send out the recording to everyone after who attended, and appreciate everyone's attendance today. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
everybody.
Thank you.
Yep. Bye.